In this tutorial, we're going to look at the functionality of the PM Wizard and how you can use this tool to quickly create PM tasks and assign them to machines or equipment in your hierarchy. You'll find the PM Wizard under the New button, usually right at the bottom, labeled PM Wizard. There's a couple of prerequisites before you can use the PM Wizard. You have to have your equipment or assets defined that you want to attach a PM task to. You also need to have at least one trade defined in the system. When you start the wizard, it will come up with a header page, and the beauty of this program is that you simply have to click the next button to move on to the next screen. The system will prompt you for the information that you need and will not let you proceed unless you have filled in the information that's required. So it takes a lot of the memory and memorization out of having to put together PM tasks, because it's something we don't do very often. We typically do it at the beginning of setting up the system, but then very sporadically after that. So this is a nice tool because it does all of the prompting for you. We'll click the next button, and the first thing it's going to ask us is which asset or which piece of equipment do we want to attach this task to. So we can click the asset button to search for the machine or the equipment that we want, and it will bring up our hierarchy of equipment. We'll select the one that we want to create the task for and click OK, and it will bring it into the wizard. When I click the next button, it will then show me a list of any existing tasks that we've already defined against that asset. And this is so that you don't accidentally duplicate a task that already exists for that machine. So it's telling me I have a standard task. That's the task number ST10000, and it's a monthly lubrication. Obviously, if it's monthly, it's based on a date trigger. And that's just a notification so that you can see what's currently defined. So we're going to click the next button, and it's now prompting us for which task we want to attach to this asset. The task, if the task exists, then we can click the task button and search for an existing task from our task library. If it's a new task that you haven't entered into the system before, then you would select create a new standard task. So that's what we're going to do here. So then I click next, and it will automatically number based on the numbering system that we've created in Guardian. It's asking now for a short description of this task. So this is like a header for what the job is. So in this case, I'm going to say semi-annual belt change / inspection. The trade I will select from my pre-existing list of trades that I've defined. We're going to say fitter. Print one per page, that will indicate whether we want to force this to print 1 PM per page when it comes out. If you're generating work orders, full work orders from the PM task, then you would put a check in generate work order. Normally that's what we recommend you do, so that your PMs are treated the same way as any other work order in the system and will show up in your planning screen to be managed along with all the other work that you have defined in the system. The machine state is what condition should the machine be in when we do this task, and again these are from a list that you've defined. I'm just going to say for the inspection or change, we're going to say this machine should be locked out. The type field is used to sort and group your PM jobs into manageable units. Normally we don't use this field unless you have a specific need for it, so I'm going to skip over that at this point. Our reschedule method for this task is saying, how do we want to schedule a job when we complete it? Should we reschedule it from its original scheduled date, or should we reschedule it from the date that it was completed or complied? Normally, again, we would leave it as scheduled because you want to build up a PM plan that stays quite static, that stays predictable, so that you know when you expect certain jobs to come out, and that isn't always changing and your labor requirements shifting over time. So once we've filled in the necessary information, we click the next button. And this is saying these are the instructions now, the detailed instructions as to what we want done when this task is triggered. So I'm just going to very quickly put in here inspect belt for signs of wear, replace if necessary. Now this field is unlimited and you can put in as much text as you like here. Click the next button. Now we're into our labor requirements. This is optional. You don't have to put labor requirements on the job, but if you do, it allows us to put in a labor standard. For example, I expect my fitter to require half an hour to do this job. So that's what we're going to put here in this case. I'm just going to put 0.5, and we enter all of our times in hours, so 0.5 for half an hour, 0.25 for a quarter hour. I don't recommend that you go less than a quarter hour, because by the time someone gets a job, gets to the machine to do the work and actually does the work, you can pretty well guarantee that they've taken at least a quarter hour. The trade that we want to assign to this particular requirement. Now you can have multiple requirements on a task. I might need a fitter to do the removal and inspection, but I may also need an electrician to disconnect the power. So I can have multiple labor lines if we need. In this case, it's a fitter. The description is optional. If you want to put very specific instructions above and beyond what the task instructions are, you can. So once I've filled in the time, then I can click Add More if I needed to add another line for my electricians, or I just click Next, and that will provide a summary of the information that we just added to the task defining the labor requirements. Now I'm going to click Next. This will come up to the Materials and Services screen, and this allows us to attach any parts that we might need for the job. The Catalog button will provide a search of our catalog. If you leave this initial checkbox, the Use Parts List checkbox, unchecked, you'll be searching the entire catalog. If you check it, you will only search for items that have previously been cross-referenced to the asset that we're working on now, in this case D1-10-A. So normally, again, you would probably leave this unchecked, especially in the early stages of defining your system. So I'm going to click the search, and I'm going to look for a belt. So I'll just type in belt and search, and that's found a V-belt, so that's what I'm going to use. And how many do we need on this particular machine? Well, we only need one. There's some extra information that you can put in if you'd like. You don't have to. You can even specify a supplier and price if you need to. If you want to add additional parts, you'd simply click the Add More checkbox, and when you click Next, it will continue to prompt until you uncheck the Add More checkbox. So we'll click Next, and it again confirms what we have entered. It would have a complete list of parts if there were more than one. So we'll click Next again. And now we're defining the trigger that we're going to use to activate this task on this machine. And you have four choices: a date interval, which is by far the most common; a meter interval, which is used when you're triggering tasks based on hours or kilometers or anything that you measure in an incremental fashion; meter range, if it goes above a certain limit or below a certain limit; and event-based, where you define events in the system such as a shutdown, and you raise that event and this job will become active. We're just going to stick with our date interval because this is a semi-annual belt inspection, so we're going to use date, and I'll click next. It asks me for the first date that I want this task to be performed. And you can click the big drop down arrow. That'll bring up our calendar, and I can use my arrows to select when the first time I want it to happen will be. So let's say we're going to do this on the 1st of February. And from that point on, every 6 months. Now I can use months as the interval and simply put 6 in my frequency field. Or as I like to do, I usually like to schedule by weeks, because that lets me control the day of the week the task is going to be performed on. So I'll say weeks, and in this case for semi-annual I'm going to use 26 weeks, half of a year. So if you remember when we set the date, it's a Friday, so that task will always come out on a Friday whenever it's triggered from this point on. We'll click next. The Assign Employee screen is not used very often. It's only used if this task requires a specific person to do it. And that's usually only the case if you have a specialized piece of equipment and someone who has received specialized training to service it. And they're the only person that is allowed to work on this machine. Normally, we just leave it at the trade level. So I've said I need a fitter, and that's really all I'm worried about. We'll assign the person when we actually print the task out and send it out for the work to be done. So I'm going to leave that blank. We'll click next. The work order priority. So if we don't want to use the default priority when this comes into our planning screen, we can override that with a higher or lower priority. I'm just going to use the default in this case. And now I'm finished. Now if I click the next button, it will take me back to the beginning, and I can define another task to be used on this or another asset. So I can just keep doing this loop of creating and assigning tasks. If I click the finish button, the screen will close down. So this is a really quick and easy way of defining your tasks, and I hope you found that helpful.